you can tell when I push it through there, the accomplishment because of the way that it sounds, you know what I mean? In other words, if you make a stroke and it doesn't cut anything, you'll know right away, the audience, anybody would, but when it cuts, you'll know it's just like spitting stuff out. It's gonna spit everything that way. I can make it spit it the other way. I don't care if it gets all over everything, I don't care, you know? I can make it discharge that way, you know what I mean? And it'll be like, it's gonna really throw some stuff out. Well, we're back from New York with the pieces that we cut out of the woods that we're hoping to use for a breast hook, and that's what this video is really gonna be about. But before we get involved with that, I'm gonna recut the shear here a little bit because after we put the lift rails on and looked at the boat all over again, we already had the guards clamped up there, and it was one opportunity to adjust it, and we just lowered it because we couldn't raise it anywhere. So we pushed it down amidships a little bit more and redrew another line on it, and we're cutting that line with the skill saw again, just taxiing along on our little rolling stool here, and it's working pretty good for us. We cut into the frame heads a little bit, but that doesn't matter because we're going to cut all the frame heads off anyhow a little bit later on. The next thing we're actually going to do is pick up a little rabbet plane here and plane that skill saw cut a little bit because it's just a tiny bit ragged, and I can't use like a number 5 or a big smooth plane or anything because the frame heads are still sticking up, but I just thought I'd just kind of tidy it up a little bit. Now I'm using the saw marks really as the depth for my planing here because I'm not going to get back really and sight it or do anything like that. I've already sighted the line, I've already cut it as straight as I could cut it. I'm not trying to straighten it out or do anything. All I'm really trying to do is just smooth it a little bit because it just feels a little bit ragged. We're just finishing up planing here and just making sure that we're done one end to the other, and then we're going to pick up a square and square a mark across the top of the frame in line with our new adjusted shear right there, and that's just so that we know exactly how to cut the frame heads off when we go to cut them. So I've decided to recut the frame heads a little bit lower because I've cut the shear a little lower, and I'm not going to take the plank off, and I want that frame head to, like I said before, be just a tiny bit below the plank. So I really can't do it with a handsaw, or I probably could, but it would be difficult. So this thing here makes it kind of easy, a little dangerous, but I'm used to it, so we just go at it. With this tool, I'm going to cut below the line because I want to make sure I keep my eyes on the line all the time when I'm cutting. I can't afford to drift around with this thing whatsoever. It needs discipline, this thing does, and you can see that I don't just have it in like mid-air. I don't have my hands or my elbows floating around in mid-air. I've got my elbows parked right on my knees. I got my feet on the sole of the skiff here, you know, I'm parked, you know, I've got my butt parked on a little stool, and I'm as stable as I can possibly get so that I can make a nice clean cut through there, because it's kind of like a chainsaw. It pulls when it cuts, you know. It doesn't want to push back at you unless you're using it absolutely the wrong way, so you can anticipate that it's going to pull a little tiny bit, and you set yourself up for that so you're in resistance to that, and you just line yourself up as nicely as you can, and you know, you get used to it after a while, and it makes a really, really nice cut. I don't really think there's that much danger in it if you know exactly what you're doing with it, but there's no question that it takes experience. So there's our latest in shear lines right there. Now we've lowered it just a little bit in this area right here, and I think it improved the lines of the boat quite a bit. It really doesn't change the boat in any great way. It's exactly the same height up forward as it was, and the same thing at the transom, just a little bit lower in here. Now the next thing we want to do is fit a breast hook into it. And we've come out of the woods with these few pieces right here. Really, we were kind of up against it, and we went in there under a moment's notice, and we've cut out a few of these forks in the trees. They're like 60-degree forks, and I think this is the best one of the three that we've got right here. And I think I'm going to process that one first, try to get it out of that one piece so I don't have to process all three of them. I'm going to try my best to get it right out of that one first and see how we make out. So the first thing for me to do here is to cut this end of it off right here, because I'm actually going to rip it in the band, so I'm going to stand it up on end and pass it through the bandsaw. So I'm going to shorten it up right here. I'm going to use my little electric chainsaw right here, my little honey, and the first thing I want to do is actually nip the end of it off right here so it squares it up to the cut, because it makes it easier for me to walk it through there. So that's the first thing I'm going to do right there. This little chainsaw's got power, but it doesn't have much blade speed at all, so you kind of have to be patient with it, but it does cut real nicely. Too happy about that. Let's try that again. Like that. It's going to go through the bandsaw like that. So we're going to thin it up like this and make the two sides parallel to each other. The first thing we're going to do, though, is to smooth this up right here. Now that is the chainsaw cut that we made in the woods right there. So we're going to smooth it up a little bit here with an electric plane. Now I'm moving around in different directions here with this thing, and it's pretty nicely balanced. I can use two hands on it or just one hand behind it, and it's cutting really, really well, as you can tell. So you'd be surprised in one pass what you can take off, maybe a 1/16 of an inch. And you know, I thought it was a little flatter than it was. So once I got looking at it, it was a little bit twisted when we cut it with a chainsaw. So there is a little bit of material to take off one corner here. So we're just working at that a little bit and then sighting it to make sure we get that twist out of it. I'm using one of the frames here that was extra for the boat as a straight edge and just dropping it on top there and just referencing it like that just to make sure it's kind of flat. We're just finishing up planing this thing out right now. It's getting real close to flat right now, and I can back off the adjustment on my planer quite a bit because I don't need to take off so much in one pass. Now I've got to check it and sight it a little bit, but it's pretty much done right there. I'm going to plane the end cuts 90 degrees to that face that I just planed out right there, because I just want it to stand up nice and straight on the table when I rip it. Good enough. So now what I'm going to do is just mark it at 15.5 inches long front to back here, and the reason why I'm doing that is so that I can stand it up and get it through my bandsaw real easy. I think I can get 16.5 inches through my bandsaw, but I'm just going to be real conservative about it. Now I'm just going to draw a line through those two marks, like so. There. I'm going to cut that right off in the bandsaw first. The reason why we flattened this side out was so that it would lay nice and neatly against this fence when we rip it right here. So we're going to shorten it up a little bit on the end, and then we're going to get started ripping it. My saw is opened up to 16 inches here, so it's really got quite a depth of cut. And you'll notice that the fence is standing up parallel to the blade pretty darn tall too, because you want that fence to control this piece. You want to slam the piece right up against the fence real nice and not be guessing at it. You couldn't be using a fence like you would like on a table saw, maybe 4 or 5 inches tall. It just wouldn't work out for you. So this helps tame the piece as you pass it along through here, and it makes a really nice cut. So there's one cut done right there, flat on both sides. And the next thing we're going to do with it is take it over and put it in a bag and cook it for a little while. Now here is the piece that we've been processing right here, and I think it looks great, especially for just a piece of wood out of the woods, you know, that we can go out ourselves and collect. And it's got great detail in it. It's not quite as thick maybe as I'd like it to be, and maybe it's a little bit narrower than I'd like it to be. I could use it in the boat, and I'm certainly going to save it, but I love it. But I decided that I was going to do something I said I wasn't going to do, and that was to cut out another piece, because I had a little bit of time, and they didn't mind doing it, and that one came out like this. Now the detail in this one's a little bit different, but I think it looks really good too. It's thicker, it's a little bit wider, it fit in there really nice. I think this is the piece I'm going to use right here. Now I've already fit it some, and it's close, but the next thing I want to do is cook it. So I've got this plastic bag here that I made up, and it's sealed together on 3 sides. And what I'm going to do is slide it into this plastic bag, seal up the 4th side, and get steam in it. I'm just going to let it sit so it glues itself together. That. Now we're going to melt some more of it together here. I've got just a very small amount hanging over the bench, because if you have too much, it really gets to dripping and stuff like that. So it's pretty easy as long as you don't have too much hanging out there. Pretty simple to do, really. Oh. Yeah, we're all set. One run, just like that. Now I've just let it sit there for a second, just to cool off a bit, and now I can move my weight there and pick my piece up. Maybe move it back on the bench a little bit and place my piece back on there again. Get it adjusted the way I want. Now that's close enough. They're not perfectly even with each other, but they don't really have to be at all. I mean, I could recut it with a pair of scissors, but there really isn't any need to. So I'm just going to start right off and go again. And this is pretty easy to do. So a lot of people have asked me how it is that you seal the bag together around the edges. And I suppose there's other ways, but you could put all kinds of gizmos on there or do anything you want. But this is pretty simple, and doesn't really take any time and takes care of business. Just like that. Now I'm just going to let it sit again, like I said, just for a second, just so we don't rip that apart while it's still soft. And that should be ready. We've got that last little bit hanging over the bench there. And place our weight again, and that's perfect. That's going to work out just right. Now that only just took minutes to do that thing, one into the other. It's really no problem at all. You could put together some pretty large bags like this if all you had was some polyethylene just like this. There's no fancy equipment or material here. Some polyethylene and a little torch. And there you go, just like that. Done. I'm going to shut my torch off. Now we're going to pick the piece up and put it in position. Basically, I'm going to just kind of position it the way I want it to be. It looks pretty safe to me right there. And then I'm going to plug a hole in it and stick my hose from the tank into it. And I made that hole just a little bit bigger than I want. So I'm just going to put a little spring clamp alongside of it there. That should take care of that. See, it has to be kept together, you know what I mean? Yeah, do you see that thing drip? The smoke behind it? It's too cool, man. If you want me to drip some of it, do you see it? Look at it burning, watch. What I'm going to do now is just take and roll some of the bag up on this stick because I don't want it to quite have as much volume inside as that. It doesn't have as much volume. It's going to be much easier for me to keep it real hot in there. So that's a simple way of doing that. Just put a spring clamp on it and just let it sit there. Works great for us. So basically, we're ready to light the thing up here, adjust it a little bit, get as much heat coming out of that gas as we can under that can. And we've got a real simple steam generating system here. We've got a little tiny propane tank, that's all we need, and a little turkey boiler, I guess you might call it, and a gas can. And believe me, that gas can doesn't have gasoline in it. That's holding water right there. So we're gonna generate some steam, and it's gonna come up that black hose and go right up in there. We've got our same old system that we were using there to test the water. It's our little stick that we blow bubbles down into the water with. And we do have to keep track of that water. The reason why we're steaming it at all is that I believe that when it cools down from a real aggressive steaming, that it helps it from checking afterwards. If it was just green and I put it in the boat, who knows, it might develop a check in a place that it wouldn't look very good. So I think this really helps cut down on the chances of it checking, and it helps it season out a little bit faster. And we're going to let it sit there and steam for quite some time because we want it to cook as much as it can so that it kind of loosens up the lignin that's in the wood. And we want it to heat right to the center of that thing so that when we do shut the steam off, the thing will drain right out. So what we're going to do is get it going, and believe me, it's going to get hot in there, and it's going to stay hot for a number of hours. So there's our little system, and it's working really nicely. I mean, we're producing quite a bit of steam, and it's just the crudest thing, but it is working great. That is hot inside. There's no question about that. Now, that's going to stay that way for a couple hours at least before I turn the steam off. So it's having an effect, that's for sure.